Greetings everyone. This is my first time playing Noise with any degree of seriousness, so I would appreciate any pointers or tips on how to play Noise better. Now, I've never really liked Noise as an ID or the current dominant archetype of cash ESOPs outside because I find that Noise is way too it's too high variance. Whether you see a wild side or ESOPs early or not is a huge factor in determining how well you do in the game. If you get a good combo going early with an opening hand of lots of caches, grimoires, you will do very well. Whereas if you don't, there's nothing you can do to really recover from that. It's not a very consistent ID, and it's made worse by all the random milling, so I don't like it. So, I've played a couple of games against this guy. He's playing the Foundry, and as you saw in the first game that was running in the background while I was talking, I got instantly flatlined by a Merlin. Triple Merlin. Don't worry, this is not imbalanced. The problem was against the Foundry, you should always draw up before running. I didn't do that, and consequently, I deserve to lose. You always have to draw at least one card before running against Foundry. So we went for a rematch because that was way too quick, and this is my deck. As you can see, I'm running auto scripters. Some guy attempted to do this during Worlds and did pretty well with it. So I find it very interesting, auto scripter deck, and it really does cover the weaknesses of outside, which is the loss of a click. So I'm deciding to try it, as well as Inject, which has injected new life into Anarchs. The release of these two cards in the previous two data packs is what motivated me to give Noise a shot, and hopefully I'll learn more about the ins and outs, the ups and downs of Noise so that I can play better against it. Now, my opening hand I consider to be fairly marginal. I wouldn't complain if this was my mulligan hand, but since this is my first hand, I can decide to swap it for a potentially better one. Plus 3 is a dead card in this matchup, and Inject is pretty... if it doesn't hit very well, like if it trashes a lot of programs, I guess that's good because I get money, but if it draws me useless cards, or if it doesn't draw me into ESOPs from outside, I'm going to have a lot of trouble this game if I'm stuck with my opening hand. So I mulliganed it, and well, it turned out for the better after all. Show Gamble in my opening hand is a blessing. One reason why I need to include Show Gambles in this deck, some Noise decks don't run Show Gambles. I need it because this deck requires a lot more setup than your typical Noise deck. Because instead of using clone cheats or scavengers, I'm using Auto Scripter, which requires 3 to install. So that's not cheap. I draw into an Inject, which is fantastic, so it allows me to power draw for more cards, and I find the wild side very crucial here. So I immediately install it on my first turn and pass the turn over. So this was a very, very good opening turn. I got lots of money from Inject, and I still have 7 credits even after installing a wild side, so fantastic. So now I'll be drawing 2 cards every turn. One of the big objectives of this deck is to mill lots of cards, hopefully lots of agendas against the Corp. I run and see an Executive Bootcamp. Oh, this is tough. I decide to trash it. It's very important to trash Executive Bootcamp against this particular ID. I do not want him to freely res ice because that means that he will be able to pull more ice out of R&D and thicken his defenses, which I definitely do not want. Against other IDs, it's fine. I can let him get free res because freely resing his ice means that I have more parasite targets, which is great for me. But against Foundry, I cannot afford to let him draw into lots of ice. So yeah, so he installs more servers. I know I cannot bring to his servers because I haven't drawn any icebreakers. So instead, I solidify my board position by playing some of the basic viruses. Meanwhile, he scores an ABT, which is horrible news for me. Thankfully, it only hits one agenda. One ice. But remember that because ABT allows you to reshuffle the other 2 cards back with the Foundry's ability, there will be no agendas that were milled due to ABT. So that's something to keep in mind. So basically, he's getting free reses and free installs, which is not very good for me. On the bright side, the one good thing is that he gave me a parasite target, which is the Lancelot that he just rested. Now, some of you might be wondering, you have Auto Scripter in your opening hand, why aren't you installing it? Then you get free installs every single turn. The problem with Auto Scripter, I'm sure you know, is that it trashes itself on an unsuccessful run. So I need to get to the mid game where I'm comfortable with Okay, mid-game has arrived. Yep. As I said, I do not want to make unsuccessful runs the moment I have AutoScripter installed. It costs me 3 influence and 3 credits and 1 click to install. For it to be trashed, that's a huge cost, huge setback. So I need to make sure that I'm not going to make unsuccessful runs after I get the AutoScripter done and installed. I found that I didn't really have time to face check his HQ or R&D. So usually the plan is to face check R&D and HQ before installing AutoScripter. So there'll be ICE that's rest on central servers, and that means there'll be valid parasite targets. That means I'll know what I'm up against. Alright, so he tries to score another agenda, I believe. It looks like an agenda to me. Meanwhile, I just install more cards. I am now running low on credits. My Show Gamble and Injects have used themselves up, and I haven't found a cache yet. In the meantime, obviously, he scores another ABT, which is even worse news for me. Thankfully, once again, he only finds 1 ice with it. The bad news is it's an Architect. Oh dear, that is not a very nice ice for me to deal with. I do have 1 Mimic in my deck, but I'm not sure if I have consumed that Mimic already with Inject or with just discarding it. So yes, I'll definitely be searching for my Mimic. Mimic is so important nowadays with Architect around and with so many people playing Jinteki, all versions of Jinteki. You have to play Mimic now. It's probably more important than Corroder is against Wraparound. Yep. Alright, so in the meantime, I decide that I really need money, so I install the ESOPs and I trash the David because this guy is not going to run big ice. It's true that I scouted his deck a bit prior to this, but we both kind of know each other's decks. We've played each other quite a bit already with the same decks. He's running basically Grail Ice, Nyx Ice, and Architect. On the other hand, I'm running AutoScripter. So we both know what to expect from each other somewhat. Now he makes a very good move here. He installs Ice over Archives, so I cannot make any more successful runs at all. I draw into my Mimic. Thank goodness. But I cannot afford to run. If I make a wrong run, if I run into a Grail Ice and I cannot break it, I will potentially suffer net damage, which might kill my Mimic. My AutoScripter will go to the trash, and I might get program trash, which means I will lose my Scheherazade and everything installed upon it. But I had to take the risk, so I ran his HQ, and lo and behold, the worst news that could ever hit. I hit an Architect with the Mimic in hand. Well, on the slightly bright side, at least I didn't face check a Grail Ice. I think this was a very stupid move by me to run HQ, but I was getting very desperate because I couldn't for the life of me find my breakers. I drew like nearly half my deck. All I had was the single Parasite that killed the Lancelots. I couldn't find my Crypsis, my main breaker. So as punishment, he gets 2 free installs, and he accidentally kicked me out of the server. I should get a successful run. At least the run was successful, which means AutoScripter still remains on the board, and at least this means that my rig stays safe, my hand stays safe. Well, that was a mouthful. So I run and very luckily sniped the Haze Fragment. I think it was a mistake for him not to install the Haze Fragment that was in his HQ. He should have done that and put it in his remote server. That would be a very secure place to store his Haze Fragment, and more importantly, it would deny me the access, and yeah, he would win the game if he manages to score that 3-pointer. And not to mention that Haze Fragment's a good counter to Noise, although with how many agenda points he has now, he doesn't need it. So he plays Peak Efficiency after freely rezzing the silver, and gets a bit of money. Not a lot of money though. He only gets +2 credits off the back of that Peak Efficiency, which is pretty lousy. So I still maintain that Peak Efficiency isn't that good a card. You really need to do a lot to get it going. Alright, I finally find a Deja Vu, which is a breath of fresh air. With the Deja Vu, I rescued a cache that was trashed by Inject, as well as a Parasite. This is one of the best things to do with Deja Vu, to retrieve your money, and a breaker. Parasite is my only breaker that I have in my heap. The closest thing that resembles a breaker. And just in time too, because Right after that deja vu, he scores the Chronos project that was lying on R&D that he installed with Architect. So he basically trashed my entire heap, which I didn't need anymore because the two essential cards, the Cache and the Parasite, were rescued just prior. Very lucky for me there, but unfortunately, this puts me in a horrible bind because he's on 5 points, match point. This means that a single 3-2 agenda wins him the game. This means I need to check every single face down card he slides into that remote, which is a huge pain. I'm still not ready to deal with face checking Grail Eyes. Grail Eyes is really bad against noise. I mean, really good against noise. Good for him. Bad for me because I still haven't found my Crypsis. I've dug through 2/3 of my deck. I have 3 Crypsis in my deck, not a single one seed. Alright, he's low on credits, so I can afford to run Archives for free. Yep. And just to check to make sure if he has any agendas in there. No agendas. Well, all that milling for nothing. And I have 1 click left because I use AutoScripter to install cache. It should have been on the table, as I said. Here I made a crucial mistake. I should have ran R&D. He had no credits to res ice. What was I thinking? Running Archives, I should have ran R&D. And instead of drawing up the card, that was a free virus token of medium that could have been mine. So that was a fatal mistake by me. And he slides the card into that remote. I have to contest it, but I still haven't found my Crypsis. If I found my Crypsis, I could at least install it this turn and give it a shot. I have a lot of money, and I have a Stim hack to go with that as well. But without breakers, I can't afford to go in. What if I hit a Galahad that deals net damage and trashes all my programs? That's nasty. So I considered the game. There was no way I was going to get in with the limited number of clicks I had, so I just played the Deja Vu that I drew up. I used it to retrieve, for that matter, the Cache and the Parasite. And then I made the run on R&D, knowing that he was pretty low on credits. Once again, this is very risky. As long as he has at least 2 credits, he can threaten a Galahad, which I see off the top of R&D. He lets me through. And I run once more. Galahad and reverse the counts. That stays there. I don't need it. But yeah, I feel very, very threatened because as long as he can res a Galahad, he can threaten net damage and program trashing just because I don't have a Corroder out. I finally draw my Crypsis with 10 cards to go from my R&D. I unload the cache that I pulled out earlier. I install the Mimic. And I make a run on R&D. Since he didn't res that ice earlier on, I assume it was not a Galahad. So if it was a Lancelot, I have the Mimic to deal with it. Turns out it's a Next Silver, so I bounce off and that kills my AutoScripter for good. Then I run through HQ. I think his agenda flooded in HQ. And then I break through the Architect. So far I've done a pretty good job of keeping him poor on credits. If that card in the remote was a 3-2 agenda, he still doesn't have the chance to score it because he's spending all his time resing ice. I'm forcing him to res lots of ice so that he will always be lower than 3 credits, which means that he cannot score a 3-2 agenda. Meanwhile, he protects HQ, and this tips me off for good. He has a lot of agendas in hand. So I'm going to exploit that. I'll run his HQ. Once again, oh, it's a Galahad. Oh man, that was the one ice that I was fearing the most. But thankfully, so lucky for me, he has no other Grail Eyes in hand, so he cannot hit me with net damage or trash any programs. Thank goodness. I could have lost a lot of momentum there. So I just Parasite off the Next Silver, and now my medium starts going out of control. I do a rerun because I forgot to access multiple cards. So this is where noise gets really, really scary. He didn't defend R&D adequately, and as a result, I'm digging through his deck like crazy. If he doesn't do something about my medium quickly or R&D, he is going to lose the game because I'm also on match point at 5 points as well. One more agenda could do me the game. So, of course, he ices up R&D and he needs to get credits. He is very, very poor right now. Yeah, lucky for me, I did manage to see my parasites very often. I didn't see the crypsis at all, but what I did see was a couple of parasites and the deja vus to rescue them back. So his Grill Eyes couldn't keep me out for very long. In fact, I was very happy with Grill Eyes because it cost him a lot to put them on the table, but is easily breakable with parasites because they are all low strength. So I installed the crypsis. I'm finally immune from all the nasty Grill Eyes, and I can now safely run R&D. I'll see whether he reses this. Well, if he doesn't res this and he has a 3-2 agenda in the remote, he wins the game unless I fish out an agenda. So this will pose a great dilemma to him. While he thinks about his move, yes, the game has gotten to the late game stage where noise goes out of control. By now, I've already assembled my entire rig of 3 cyber feeders and all the programs I need to place immense pressure on him. I have a fully loaded data sucker, which will make breaking with crypsis much cheaper. I have a loaded medium, which is always something that the cores worry about. And I have Mimic and Crypsis to break through all the servers. So I'm in very good shape right now. He shows me a lowly Galahad, which I easily break through with Crypsis. And I access a grand total of 4 cards. A Merlin, blue level, next bronze, and Executive Bootcamp. Well, I have the assurance that he won't be drawing any more agendas anytime soon, but I'm pretty sure he has a couple in hand and in the remote. So I'll be looking to siege those servers next. And he does the right thing here, clear virus counters. Because otherwise I would just dig his R&D, very porous R&D in subsequent turns. My next turn, I do a wild side draw and pawn off the wild side. I then install more viruses so that Archives becomes an alternative route to victory. I trash the Galahad so I don't need to spend tokens on Crypsis. Spend valuable time charging Crypsis rather. So I'm basically forcing him to re-protect R&D, which is costing him a lot of tempo. I pawn off my data sucker and check his archives for the win. That is, if there are any agendas in there. Yes, there are, but it's only one agenda that's worth 1 point, so it's not the game yet. So now I need to run R&D, and let's see what's in there. He doesn't rest the ice, so it's not a next ice, it's not a Galahad. And I find the Vitruvius right off the top to win the game. Through this game, I realized just how nigh unstoppable Noise is once he gets to the late game. Because he has so many various tools at his disposal, so many means of disruption, and so many points of attack, that there are so many possible routes to victory. And as the co-op, it's very hard to deal with this multi-pronged pressure placed by Noise. It didn't help for my opponent that he had all his money cards milled by the random milling from Noise, which meant that he was perpetually poor the entire game, which made it very hard for him to score that last agenda. On my side, I felt incredibly vulnerable during the early and mid stages of the game, and it just goes to show that even with the increased consistency brought by Inject coupled with Wildside, Noise is still very much a high variance ID. Not seeing Crypsis until the last third of my deck really ruined my game and nearly cost me the game as well, because I wasn't able to break through the remote at all. My Stim Hack in my hand was useless all the way, because I never could use it in conjunction with a Crypsis. I still think that fast decks are the solution to Noise's incredible power. You have to win the game before it gets to the mid to late game, where Noise has so many ways of making you just lose the game outright. Flatlining is the alternative, but it's pretty hard to pull off against a well-prepared Noise who should be packing 2 or 3 plus crits in the deck to deal with Scorched Earth. I enjoyed this set of games because it was a good learning experience fighting against a Merlin Foundry and playing Noise for one of the first times myself. And I hope that you guys enjoyed and learned something from it too. Thanks for watching and happy net running. Goodbye.